Anime. You know it. You may love it. And that guy in your class, you know, the one with the neck beard and the weird hat, well, he really loves the one about those monster girls. When the idea of anime comes up, most people have some kind of idea of what it is, but they don't know much about it. Much less, they don't know how much impact it's had on American media. When you have people like Kanye West, Britney Spears, John Boyega, Kim Kardashian, James Cameron, Snoop Dogg, Guillermo del Toro, Steph Curry, Samuel L. Jackson, the late great Robin Williams, and Michael B. Jordan all talking about anime, well, it starts to be a little interesting. How did all these people that have majorly influenced American culture and American media been impacted by something that not a lot of people know about? How is such a niche thing so prominent? And that's kind of where we have to look at anime's impact in America. Because while a lot of people think that anime's only been around for, a couple decades, the truth of the matter is it started back in the early 60s that anime has been impacting the West, and it's just something that's incredibly interesting because it's such an important part of the millennial experience. It's given them an escape from their daily lives. It's given them a sense of community, especially on the internet, which is something that really started when we were, preteens and we were developing ourselves digitally. And so it's important to look at anime and see that it's not just this new fad that's kind of swept the nation, and really reflect on how it's changed and adapted in this new age. And, hey, even if you know everything there is to know, you might still learn something. So I hope you guys enjoy. While there can be a lot of speculation over anime and manga's origins and its inspiration from ukiyo-e woodblock prints or traditional no storytelling, one thing that most people can agree on is that it was mainly inspired by World War II. Yes, World War II, your grandpa's favorite thing to watch movies about. Tora Tora Tora! Pearl Harbor! World War II! You see, World War II was a very tumultuous time, and what a lot of people saw was early anime creators were making propaganda films that were introducing children to this idea of a Japanese empire ruling over the entire world. And these anime creators didn't necessarily want to do that. They didn't want their creations just to be things of violence. They were effectively making state-made propaganda, and it wasn't what they wanted to do. It wasn't what they wanted to use to indoctrinate youth. And so, after the devastating events that occurred during World War II, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and this absolute devastation of a nation, there was a lot of concern, a lot of fear as to what was going to happen in Japan. And that's when we kind of got to this interesting point. See, this is when a proud nation has been devastated by the effects of nuclear weapons, by a nuclear arsenal that has not even been used on another nation to this day. And what are they going to do with that? How are they going to respond? How are they going to regrow? And that's where Osamu Tezuka and a lot of other creators stepped in and decided they were going to do something different. They decided to make series, to make new ideas that weren't just propagations of war. They wanted to make something that entertained kids and turned them away. Because when we look at Osamu Tezuka and the things that he was inspired by, he was actually inspired by early Disney. There's the long-standing legend that he would watch Bambi in the theaters day after day after day after day. And he loved that kind of animation, and it shows, because he went and he made such classic series as Astro Boy, Blackjack, Dororo, Princess Knight, Kimba the White Lion, the story of a young lion who has to take over the Pride Lands after his uncle kills his dad, and, his name is Kimba. That's definitely not related to any kind of lion story I know that was supposed to be Othello and was not a ripoff of any other decades-old property. But he changed the norms of storytelling, and even after his death in 1989, you can still really feel his influence today, and I'm not just saying that because Dororo is currently airing. But just how Disney inspired him when he was a child. Osamu Tezuka started this trend. He started the genres of anime and manga, and while he didn't necessarily make all of them, he definitely laid a solid foundation for what we know as fundamentals today. But enough about some old dead guy. What we need to focus on and talk about is how anime's really kind of influenced America in about 5 different waves, each one more invasive than the last. And when we look at this, we need to understand that anime as we know it is completely different from how it was introduced. Ah yes, the 1960s. It was a simpler time. Kids would play hoop stick, play Who Shot the President the board game. Was it Lee Harvey Oswald?
I'm just a patsy.
The CIA, some guy in Texas, maybe the mayor. Who knew? It was a magical time for America. And when these little patriots weren't discussing the deaths of world leaders, why, they were getting together on weekend mornings, watching cartoons! Yes, cartoons, the age-old favorite of children everywhere. And so they sat, cereal in hand, lead in their walls, and a threat of nuclear devastation constantly haunting them. And they watched the little hilarious antics of Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, Daffy Duck, Astro Boy. Astro Boy? Yes, Astro Boy! The classic Osamu Tezuka thing I talked about like 4 minutes ago. About a little nuclear-powered Superboy having such relatable adventures as help a robot realize that it isn't actually living, stopping an armed space civil war, dealing with the fact that he's just a clone of a dead child created by a grieving father to be a weapon of mass destruction, and buying his sister a birthday present. All totally relatable events in your average childhood life. Alongside Astro Boy, other classics like Gigantor, Speed Racer, and Kimba the White Lion, the later to be ripped off anime, also lit up the TV tubes with their simplistic designs and deep character-rich narratives. So why were they able to share one of the most prominent time slots with other hard hitters like Foghorn Leghorn? Well, it's pretty simple. They were cheap. See, with your standard cartoon, you have to hire writers, artists, musicians, editors, and you're putting together a large team to crank out a piece that takes a ton of work over a large span of time. With anime, all that was already done for you. The show had been made. It had its airtime in Japan, and all you had to do was buy the rights, redub it into English, and release it, and sweep up the ad revenue. And this wasn't some isolated event on some offhand channel, because you have to remember, in the 60s, there was no such thing. You had maybe 4 channels to work with, and so you didn't have on-demand or streaming that would come decades later. So of the very precious time that was available on the airwaves, to have even 30 minutes of it taken up by anime a week is absolutely incredible. And yet, if you ask anyone that grew up in the 60s, they'll have almost no idea what anime is, but they might know who, Speed Racer is, or Astro Boy, because that idea of it being foreign wasn't in their head when they were watching it. They didn't understand that it wasn't an American-made idea. And while these shows saw massive edits to appeal to a young American audience, they were still shown on television. And we can't ignore that going into Guitar Sound, the 1980s. Nothing of any importance happened in the 1970s. And I know, excuse me, Mr. Butthole, the 1970s had Star Blazers come out. Star Blazers! Star Blazers was released in the 1970s. Neat. The 1980s! The 1980s were a weird time. They were a fascinating time. They were the 80s.
This is crack.
Star Wars had everyone entranced, and We had Indiana Jones, and it was this really fond time for America. Spielberg was still good, and he wasn't making weird movies about living in a video game, or about an obnoxiously large yet friendly giant, and things were cool. We saw the start of MTV and cable television, and the 1980s was probably the pinnacle of what we knew as Saturday morning cartoons. So kids would turn on their TVs and they'd be introduced to He-Man, She-Ra, G.I. Joe, Transformers, and this was a period in American media where cartoons and converted anime was more to sell toys than it was anything else. You see, we had series like Voltron or Transformers or even Macross that were taken from their source material and they were re-edited to fit the narrative that the American marketers wanted so that they could appeal to children and get them under content warnings so that more younger children could watch them and buy the toys and be more engaged with these narratives. I mean, they even took, okay, so Macross, you can't really find any history of it airing in the US, and the reason for that is, and this is ludicrous, is because they took 3 different Macross series and they mashed them together. And when they mashed them together, what they made was a show called Robotech. And it aired for a good long while. And what they would do is they would take all the main characters from the different Macross and they'd make them like nephews or uncles or aunts or whatever to make it all this one linear narrative for no conceivable reason other than they wanted to make something different. And so when you look at Robotech, while it is Macross arguable stock footage, it is actually its own legitimate thing, and it's really weird to see. Fun fact about Macross though, Macross Plus, which aired in the 90s, the lead role was actually played by Bryan Cranston.
Sleep well, my little angels.
Of Breaking Bad and Malcolm in the Middle fame, back when he was doing some voice work. He also worked on Power Rangers, as well as a couple other shows. There's your little Snapple fact for this video. Bet you didn't know that or was expecting it. But anyway, that was one of the big things that happened in the 80s. The other thing that happened was the rise of the video rental store, especially stores like Blockbuster. See, video rental was an interesting thing in the 80s because while it's super foreign to a lot of people now, VHS tapes were incredibly expensive back then because people could send out the rights for movies like E.T. or Star Wars, and you'd be paying upwards of $120 a tape to have these movies to watch them whenever you wanted. So video stores came up with the idea of, we'll just buy a bunch of tapes and rent them out. Eventually, we'll just be recouping our losses and just taking in a ton of profit every time these movies are checked out. Whether it's Star Wars, E.T., Indiana Jones, all of these big blockbusters of the 80s would become available in rental stores. And with this, movie making and video release became much more accessible to your average Joe. And that's when we saw the rise of a lot of B movies.
Remember, boy, the best way to stop the enemy? Brain shot.
Where people would make these really cheap knockoffs of already prominent movies, and then they'd sell them under their own skin to rental stores for a much cheaper price, so that they could get the same visibility as these big movies, but they wouldn't be paying as much for them. So rental stores happily took them up. And since anime licenses were still so cheap, what they would do is they would get the rights to them, they'd edit them, and then they'd re-release them in some kind of choppy, edited mess that didn't make a whole lot of sense. One of the most infamous cases of this is Roger Corman, hailed as the B-movie king, got the rights to Natsuka in the Valley of the Wind, the famous Hayao Miyazaki movie. Only he heavily edited and released it in the West as Warriors of the Wind. It was such shoddy craftsmanship And thanks to Roger Corman, this led Miyazaki to become so frustrated with edits to his work that eventually he would send a samurai sword to Harvey Weinstein with a demand of no cuts to his work. And so you would see series like Mobile Suit Gundam or Fist of the North Star come out, and they wouldn't really have proper subs, or if it was dubbed, it would be maybe one or two known voice actors at the time, but it was usually a lot of people that were picked up off the streets. So it wasn't a lot of quality in these releases at the time, despite these series being relatively popular today and being influential in a lot of people's lives, because even if they weren't well edited, the source material was still of a high enough quality that people would talk about it in the start of convention culture, where these people would get them from their standard little VHS store down the road, and they'd bring it over and everybody would gather around and watch it in a basement, and they'd talk about it, but it still wasn't known, it still wasn't popular. And that's something that kind of builds when we enter our next renaissance. Whoa! The 1990s! Nirvana! The hit American sitcom Friends! Starbucks! Yes, nothing could properly prepare the world for the 1990s. It was a weird time where what was new in the 80s had become not only established but commonplace. Televisions were in most households, and more homes were getting basic cable, and kids and adults were digesting more media than ever before. We got the introduction of a lot of video games, and the whispers of home internet were becoming louder and louder. And in this time of technological development and a media eruption, two major media companies struck gold.
Hello, Mr. Pocket. Hello, Mr. Pocket.
Saban and Warner Brothers. See, they made a bet on Japanese media and were really hoping that it would pay off. And in a lot of ways, it did. Whether it was Saban's release of Power Rangers or Digimon or Warner Brothers' acquisition of Pokemon, you saw these massive waves of attention pouring out for Eastern media in various forms, whether it was anime or Sentai or what have you. And so the idea was there that they could sell these products. And so throughout the 90s, we saw more and more adaptations being released. We saw Fighting Foodons, we saw Monster Rancher, things that were anime that were either based off video games or card games, and then those card games and video games were localized and released in the West if they had enough attention attached to them.
These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite! Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut!
And kids were eating it up. Anything that was attached to a popular show on television, they were just flying off of the shelves. And it was just mostly because of the appeal. Because here was this really obscure media that while there was this massive renaissance going on with Western animation at the time, with creators like Craig McCracken, Genndy Tartakovsky, Seth MacFarlane coming out and making things like Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Lab. Seth MacFarlane worked on Johnny Bravo, and he also released Family Guy in the 90s. But the appeal of something like the original 151 Pokemon, or seeing all these different Sentai smashed together into one actual cohesive narrative like what we saw in Power Rangers, was enough to get kids interested. And then there was also another thing that occurred in the 90s that was really kind of fascinating, but it happened on cable television. Turner Broadcast had a channel called Cartoon Network. A lot of you know what Cartoon Network is, but when it started, there wasn't a lot of media to choose from. Because they had the rights to all the Hanna-Barbera content, that was mostly what played in reruns. You know, you had Johnny Quest, Yogi Bear, The Smurfs, Jetsons, Flintstones. None of it was really new or exciting. And so in 1997, they decided to do something a little bit different. They created a little action block, and it was hosted by Moltar from Space Ghost. And this action block would later become Toonami. And what it would do is it would have an afternoon show and a late night show. Not on the weekends, not on Saturday mornings, But during the week, they would have these runs, and it was Sailor Moon, or Dragon Ball Z, or reruns of Johnny Quest, but even reruns of Robotech. But there was something different about these shows on Cartoon Network, and that was they weren't as heavily edited as their more kids' Saturday morning equivalents. Yes, there are famous edits in Sailor Moon, and Robotech was, again, an amalgamation of Macross, but things like Dragon Ball Z were relatively left alone. They didn't try and re-edit it to fit a narrative. Dragon Ball had failed previously in the West, so the release of Dragon Ball Z was kind of interesting. And these were things that kids would come home and watch, because as we saw in the 90s, we also saw the dissolution of things like the nuclear family. We saw more kids become latchkey kids because both parents were entering the workforce. And so these kids would come home, they'd do their homework while watching Cartoon Network, while watching Sailor Moon or Dragon Ball Z or what have you. And while it wasn't a lot, these few shows really got their curiosity. It made them interested because it was more mature than what they were used to. It was a cartoon that offered a deeper, richer narrative, and kids were constantly tuning in. And in the new millennium, things just erupted. 2000s music, because it's the 2000s now. The 2000s saw all kinds of crazy, weird stuff, like Video Now. Remember Video Now? It was this little compact handheld video player that would play videos in black and white, ran on like 5 AA batteries, and each of the videos was only like 15 minutes long, if that. And they were like incredibly popular for 6 months, and that was it. They were incredibly stupid.
I want my video now!
You see, following the initial shockwave of anime flooding into the mainstream, a tsunami of content poured in through the 2000s. Rurouni Kenshin, Gundam, Yu Yu Hakusho, Outlaw Star, Tenchi Muyo, Ouran High School, you had Yu-Gi-Oh! Even some original projects produced by Cartoon Network, including IGPX and Big O. Only the second season of Big O was actually produced by Cartoon Network, the first season was not. And they were all over on Toonami. And the shows that saw popularity in the 90s also continued to surge in the 2000s. This, compounded with the release of Adult Swim and other channels trying to get their own piece of the anime pie, created a massive influx of media. But something was different about this 2000s renaissance. For once, the anime wasn't being heavily edited for Western audiences. People were being trusted to understand this was a foreign idea. It was definitely a risky gamble, but in 2005, when a certain yellow-haired ninja made his way onto the scene, it really paid off. See, Naruto was a part of something that was later lovingly called the Big Three. It consisted of Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece, and in the mid-2000s, all three made it out west. While One Piece was technically the first one to make it over, due to its heavy edits by 4Kids to make sure it appealed to a younger audience, it would be fair to say it didn't get a proper release until several years later when the rights were picked up by Funimation.
You should be watching.
But Naruto was a part of a new weird movement. See, Naruto wasn't relegated to just the Toonami block like many of its fellow more mature shows or Adult Swim. It would commonly play on the Cartoon Fridays lineup, on Saturday mornings, and would even be the subject of a Naruto Hundo marathon over an entire weekend celebrating its 100th episode. And because of Naruto, more and more kids began taking an interest in Shonen Jump, and we saw a rise in interest in other Jump series of the time, including the aforementioned Bleach and One Piece. Because these kids may not have known that Yu Yu Hakusho or Rurouni Kenshin or Dragon Ball Z were Shonen Jump series, now they were given the opportunity to understand that. So when Bleach premiered on the Adult Swim block, it was met with incredible fanfare.
Anime from J-Town, Adult Swim, Japan.
And another fascinating thing that began happening was dub studios were becoming more and more recognized. Voice actors were showing up at conventions and they had become celebrities in their own rights. Funimation would release more and more home video projects knowing that fans would pick the content up, and the star power of their dubs like Ouran High School, Soul Eater, and even Fruits Basket was enough to drive sales. This caused the quality of dubs to increase as well as the demand for them. And then YouTube happened. Back in the mid-2000s, it was almost impossible to watch any video content online. If you wanted to watch a 30-minute video, you were looking at hours for it to load, and that's where things like Toonami Jetstream just could not compete with YouTube. Where Jetstream's average video was about 23 minutes and full of weird anime you've never seen before, YouTube was averaging around like maybe 4 minutes. And so more and more people flocked to it, and that's when they began to notice something. See, YouTube was universal. Anyone could upload content to it. And so people were uploading these little anime clips. And other video sharing and video hosting sites were also uploading all kinds of anime content that people had never seen before. And especially with shows like Naruto or Bleach, people were noticing that they were really behind their Japanese counterparts. Here was this whole new world of manga and anime that was made available to them. And so with the introduction of household internet, what we really saw was a tearing down forcefully of the walls dividing our media diets.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And so we saw episodes hastily subtitled by amateur fans who didn't know what they were doing, and so we got some really horrible subs. We saw horrible translations, but people were just really wanting to get this content out, and they didn't care. They didn't care how rocky or choppy it was. So we had more anime than ever at our fingertips, and it was just this really magical time. Now, was it legal? Probably not, honestly. And that's kind of where things get a little sketchy. See, a lot of this was released under different people's names, and no one really gave a lot of original credit to people or bought the rights to them. It was really a wild west of properties. So the creators weren't getting any ad revenue or weren't getting any kind of compensation for their work being taken and edited. And while this problem still kind of exists today, what happened in the 2010s really revolutionized how we look at anime. 2010s, that's the present decade. At the start of 2009, Toonami, which had been an institution of anime broadcast for over a decade at that point, suddenly went off the air. And it was a very symbolic death of the old guard. See, majorly in the 2000s, we had seen this rise of on-demand programming. And so when we saw streaming bandwidth get better and the success of subscription services like Netflix and later Hulu, there was a real fear that anime wouldn't be able to survive that change. Because for all intents and purposes, you could watch it for free on the internet or watch it on broadcast television. And at the time, anime licensing was trying to diversify itself with very little success. Whether it was premium cable channels like Funimation or Anime Network or many a failed streaming service. Like, do you remember Neon Valley? I remember Neon Valley. They just couldn't figure it out. And how could they? It was such a slippery slope to walk on. Sure, anime was still played on broadcast television, but now we were seeing people slowly and steadily becoming cord cutters and moving over to streaming services exclusively for their media intake. And that's where the magic happened. Instead of resisting and fighting to stay relevant on old mediums like most sitcoms and reality TV, anime was in a position where it could easily pivot in any direction it needed to. Crunchyroll, which had launched back in 2006 and was really kind of a part of the original problem, decided that they should be more official. And so they started cleaning off any fan subs, they cleaned off license issues or any lawsuits that they might face, and they turned legit. And they got all kinds of partnerships. Funimation would also later launch their own streaming service. And then you also had things like High Dive. And even Netflix and Hulu joined in on it by getting rights to dubs or releasing their own anime. Amazon got in on it for a time. They even launched their own anime viewing service, which was another $99 on top of your Amazon Prime subscription, which was ludicrous amounts of money. And while we did see Toonami come back in some shape, and we did see the moderate success of shows like Yokai Watch, broadcast television just was not delivering what it was supposed to, and anime became a much more easily accessible thing for a lot of people because they could watch whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and their media diet became much more diversified like it did with other programming because everyone watched a different thing. If you're on Netflix, you watch The Office 1,000 times, and those episodes still aren't funny. Get at me, internet. I hate The Office. But no, people are watching their own things. And so now we see people catering to that. And that kind of leads us to where we presently are. Conclusion! Yeah, you're almost at the end. And kind of just looking at today, you have companies like Funimation working with a partnership with Hulu, Netflix investing in over 30 anime in just 2019 alone. It's easy to see that the future of anime is very bright. Looking back, for over 50 years, anime has been a part of the Western experience and in such an incredible way. It's been edited and chopped up, but that spirit has still been there time and time again. Kids have found communities to relate to, and it's broken down so many social barriers. You have musicians making music videos with it. You have drag queens using it in the new RuPaul seasons. You have, $100 million movies being released that are just live-action adaptations of weird anime like Alita. It's crazy to see how many people know who Pikachu, Goku, Naruto, who all these people are. We're experiencing such an incredible cultural shift that is becoming more and more inclusive and especially more globalist. We are seeing a world of media where we can watch whatever we want. And it's just so incredible to look at how anime has influenced people. And it's just growing. We see Western anime being released, like Ruby and arguably Avatar. And it's getting wide fanfare, again, globally. There are people in Japan that love an American creation like this that isn't King of the Hill. It's just so amazing. And I know I'm gushing at the end of this video, but it just needs to be said that this isn't just some fad. It's not some little sprinkling somewhere. It's had a drastic impact on what we know as media. If we look at things like Adventure Time or Steven Universe or any of these big cartoons, even Gumball has references to anime. It's just here, and it's just such a wonderful world that we live in because of it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I know it was a bit of an info dump, but I really hope you learned something today. We've got some other great videos in the works that I hope you'll also enjoy. Make sure to like, subscribe, and if you think there's anything we could improve on, definitely comment. And like always, have a wonderful day and stay awesome.